Welcome to the Finance Fools. I'm Matt.
And I'm Dan. This is episode 4. We'll be looking at the advantages and disadvantages between buying and renting. So Matt, I know that you recently bought a house. Can you fill us in on some of the advantages of owning a house?
So I've bought 2 houses in my time of home ownership, and there's definitely some advantages, definitely some disadvantages. But to start out talking about the advantages of owning a house, you've got tax benefits. Some of the tax benefits are closing costs for buying a house, and you get that whether you pay the closing cost yourself or if the seller pays them. The buyer still gets the closing cost benefit when it comes to tax time. Also, when you're paying homeowners insurance, your taxes for your property taxes every year, you get to claim those as well. And then if you have other things such as interest from student loan debt, you get to claim that as you're doing your taxes, because you have your standard deduction with taxes, but then also if you itemize and exceed that, you're better off. And that's pretty easy to do whenever you buy a house. Also, with time of owning a house, you get equity. And so you're knocking down your loan amount from what you started with until, every month it gets smaller and smaller. You own your home. So with time, if you stay there for a long time and end up paying it off, then bam, you don't have the payment anymore. You still have your insurance and your property taxes. You also have stability that comes with that, and knowing that you're not moving around from one apartment to the next looking for specials or being upset and frustrated with landlords, things like that. And I guess one of the last things that would be a positive would be the appreciation. And with time, if you bought a house for say $85,000 and then 5 years later you could sell it and sell it for $100,000 or more, not only do you have your equity from that, but then also the appreciation. So it can help you have extra cash compared to not owning. And then whether you go buy or rent, you got some cash in pocket. So those are just a few of the advantages of owning a house.
All right. And I rent, so I would much rather rent for number one reason is the freedom that comes with renting. So I like to move around a lot. And in the past 5 years, I've lived in 6 or 7 different places, as well as living abroad. So if I had a house, it would have been much more difficult to have, uprooted everything and moved to another country. Second advantage would be the repair and update cost. I have none. Because I rent, that's on the landlord. So if anything gets broken or goes out, I just got to call my landlord, and it is their responsibility to replace or repair it. Also, I have cheaper bills. I only have to pay electric on my apartment, and where I live, my electric bill is between $65 and $75 a month. Whereas, Matt, I don't know, what are your bills that you have on your house?
Well, for me, I've got the city bill, which covers water, sewer, and trash. And then on top of that, I have electricity, and then I have natural gas as well. And so those are the must-haves. That doesn't include internet and, cell phones, any other little extra things, just for the house only, just those 3. I've got a pretty efficient house. My electric bill, I'm going to say maybe $80 a month. My gas bill's close to, I'm thinking about $38 to $40. The city bill, that's one that kind of sucks, and that's about $70 a month. Overall, I'm pushing, $190 or so a month for those 3. And, if you're paying $65 to $80, depending upon the month, I mean, you're, saving over $100 a month compared to me.
Okay, yeah. And another advantage of renting is renter's insurance. So I pay about $35 a month for $100,000 of coverage. I don't know about owning. How much insurance do you have on?
So because you own a house, the insurance companies, they expect that you're going to have more property and also you're going to have more liability. And so like with more property, I mean, more things inside your apartment, more beds, more TVs, refrigerators, deep freezes, just more than what you would have in an apartment. So my homeowner's insurance is about $1,600 for the house that I live in, and then I have a rental property, and then on the rental property, I'm paying close to $1,000 a year on that. So I think it's around 85 bucks a month, something like that. So even on that, that's called non-owner occupied insurance, and that's just covered the structure. That's it. And then my tenant, they have their own renter's insurance that covers their assets inside. But so yeah, when you rent an apartment or whatever property that you rent, your homeowner's insurance your renter's insurance is definitely cheaper than what a homeowner's insurance is. What else do you have on there for kind of advantages of renting? Is there anything more?
Yeah, the last advantage I would say is that since I rent, I don't have any property tax. That was something you said was property. Now, what is property tax on your house that you own?
Well, let me see here. One of them is about $1,900, and then the other one is around just under $17. And so, I mean, that's close to $3,600 a year for the two properties I own. Every month that I get rent from my tenant, I take 1/12 of the property taxes out and put it in savings, so that way I can pay my property taxes. On the other house, the house that I live in, it's actually factored into the payment. And so, each month that automatically just goes to escrow, and then the bank, they pay the property taxes on my behalf. But, that's $300 a month between the two properties where it's going to the government, and that's it. I'm not getting anything out of it, but I'm paying it out.
Right. So, there are different advantages depending on what your situation is. So now let's get into some of the disadvantages. So, Matt, what are some disadvantages of owning a house?
Repairs, and for me, that the home that I live in with repairs, I really don't get any kind of tax break from. So that's just out of my pocket and having to deal with it. After I bought the house, I ended up discovered a little bit of rot on the siding at the very base. So I ended up deciding, hey, I'm going to cut off some of the siding, put some plywood up, and then after that, turn around and I sided my entire house. I put new windows in. The windows I didn't have to do, but since I was already going to do the siding, I thought, well, why not? But then that's one of the things is repairs. On the rental property, I get to claim that as a tax write-off, so that is a nice thing there. But even with that, it's still money out of pocket. It's costing me to do that. The cost to update or upgrade, rental house here next year, I'm getting ready to sell it. So I'm going to put a new roof on it, unless I can get lucky and get a hailstorm to pay for a new roof for me. But, I've got that to look at. I'm going to paint it, put some new windows in, and, possibly carpet. So I'm at $4,000. Possibly $6,500 to do some of this stuff, and that's just on the rental house, But it's a kind of a detriment. You try to do a lot of that on your own to save the cost and everything, but then you're there doing the work yourself, and but doing that, you're hoping that you can get some appreciation where you can make something off of it. And, when you go to sell, and then basically help out on your taxes too. Because my taxes, I've noticed from owning two houses, before when I owned one, it wasn't as big of a deal, but owning two, I get hit more with the income off the rental property. And so I don't get that great of a tax return compared to what I used to. If you go to move, you don't have the freedom like what you do. You don't have the freedom because you either have to rent the house out or you have to sell it. And then if you do go to sell it, if you don't do it on your own, if you do it with a realtor, then you're paying realtor fees, 5 to 7% probably. So I mean, those are some of the disadvantages, and it really, each person's situation is different, and that's really kind of one of those things where you take all that in consideration and figure out whether it's a good deal or a bad deal on what works for you on that. But what are some of your disadvantages, Dan, for renting? Because everybody has advantages and disadvantages both ways.
Right. So for me, we keep talking about this freedom thing. So one thing on renting is that you do have to sign that lease, and most places that you rent, you have to sign at least a year lease. Some places will let you sign maybe a 3 or 6 month lease, but then you have to pay a higher rent for that term. And if you need to get out of that lease for any reason, you have to pay a fee to get out of that lease. So that would be a disadvantage as far as the freedom aspect. Some of the other ones that kind of go together would be, poor landlords who don't update or don't come fix things.
Those are the worst, by the way.
Yeah, it might take, I remember my sister, she lived in an apartment, and she would complain about the same thing for months, and the landlords would never come fix it. For me, I've been fortunate enough to always rent from good landlords who have always come and fixed things immediately, update anything that's gone out. Another disadvantage would be limited decorating or updating. With Matt, he owns a house. He gets to do whatever he wants, put siding on, install new windows. He can paint his walls. I think you did repaint your walls, didn't you?
And yeah, painting, but I've redone almost the entire house, and so that's one thing that Dan, as a negative towards renting, he can't do some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But for me as a homeowner, I do get to do that. And then, whenever you paint and do your upgrades, it's an expense that's kind of a pain at the time. But, like I'm looking at about a year and a half of selling the house that I live in, and I'm hoping that, with appreciation and the repairs and updates that I've done, I'm hoping that I come out about $30,000 to $40,000 ahead. That would be nice. And, as a renter, Dan doesn't have that, but then also Dan doesn't have the money that he's having to put out every month like what I do. So that's saving him and gives him more freedom, financially. For me, I'm pretty strapped just because I've got 2 houses that I do this with, and, doing upgrades and repairs and updates, and you've got to manage your credit. You're trying to, not max out cards or, pay a ton of interest on all that type of stuff. And that's one of the things that I deal with, but yet cross my fingers and knock on wood and hope that with time that it'll pay me back for doing it. But, Dan, he doesn't have that as an option from living in an apartment. And so, you're dealing with white walls and tan carpet, and that's what tons of apartments do. You're very limited, and you just move your stuff in, live there, and go with the flow.
Yeah, for me, the biggest disadvantage that I've had from renting is the neighbors. Sometimes you might get lucky and get into a unit where your neighbors are never there, or they're really quiet. They never cause any issues. But then you can also get into a situation where you have really loud neighbors. Maybe you live near some college kids and they throw parties, or you live near somebody who's got really loud kids. And if you live below them, you're always going to be hearing the kids stomping around and throwing fits and screaming. Also, I'm a non-smoker. Well, everybody around me in this apartment, they're all smokers. So I can't open my window because that smoke will come straight into my apartment. So that is a disadvantage. Now, this can be a disadvantage on both sides that I've noticed is, let's say you need to have roommates. Well, that in and of itself can be a disadvantage if you are unable to pay for everything yourself, whether you're owning or renting. I've had roommates in the past from renting to try to save some money, and I've never had a good experience with roommates. So I try to do everything I can to live by myself and pay everything by myself. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Matt?
I think you covered it. And, the biggest thing is just like on many things, whether it's, you versus me or other people's situations, everybody's situation is different. But these are just a few things that are positive things, negative things about owning and also renting. We can't go and tell somebody this is what you need to go do, but these are just things you can take into your own consideration for what works for you, But later on, whenever you do, if you ever do go to look at a house, then you have to look into the mortgages, 15-year, 20-year, 30-year, all those type of things, which is another episode. But, you have to look at those things and really do a lot of good planning whenever you're going to, if you are going to go and buy. Or, you can kind of take in consideration what works for you, what doesn't work for you. I mean, overall, I think we covered a lot for this episode of renting versus buying. And later on, we'll end up talking about mortgages and some of that type of stuff as well. Let's see here. Dan, what else do you got?
I don't really have anything else to say. I would just like to thank our listeners for tuning in. And please remember to like and subscribe for more. Our next episode, we'll be talking about mortgages. So I think Matt's got a lot of really good insight into this. Remember, plan your work and work your plan. Thanks for tuning in, and you'll hear more from
The Finance Fools.